The word Africa comes from a Greek word that means without horror, gives, open with the fact, short, unexpected. It stops the scroll immediately because nobody has ever heard this before. Think about that. Gives force a pause. Two words that make the viewer slow down and actually sit with what you just said. Creates tension. The greatest land on Earth, the oldest civilization in human history, was named by outsiders. Gives. Now you establish the stakes. You're not just talking about a word. You're talking about the oldest civilization on Earth being renamed by people who didn't belong here. People who could only describe it by the suffering they didn't have to experience here. Gives. This is the twist. The name wasn't even a compliment. It was outsiders describing their own relief. That's the insult buried in the label. But the people of this land had their own name. Gives the pivot. Everything before this was the wound. This line is the turn toward the truth. Short and clean on purpose, and it didn't talk about the absence of someone else's pain. Gives contrast. You're showing the difference between how outsiders saw this land versus how the people of this land saw themselves. It called this land the mother of mankind. Gives the land in. This is the emotional payoff of the entire hook. You've gone from without horror to mother of mankind in under a minute. The viewer now needs to know everything. Alkebulan, the name they buried the name Africa, is not the true name of this land. And by the time you finish this, you won't just know that, you'll feel it in your chest, where truth settles before your mind catches up. This is not a history lesson. This is a reckoning. This land, the oldest land on the face of this earth, had a name before Rome existed, before Greece was a civilization, before the rest of the world had learned how to survive its own winters. This land already knew who it was. And that name was taken, quietly, systematically, with full intention. We will get to that name, but first you need to understand what was already here, because the name is just the surface. Underneath it is an entire world most people have never been shown. Go back, all the way back. The first truth most people miss. This land was never one thing. When people say Africa, they picture one place, one culture, one story. But this land was a universe, civilizations so layered, so complex, so deeply developed that even now, with all our modern tools, historians are still uncovering discoveries that rewrite everything we thought we knew. There were people here who built in stone while others were building in mud. People who charted the movements of stars with accuracy that modern scientists have since confirmed. Trade networks connecting the interior of this continent to the coasts of Arabia, India, and China not hundreds of years ago. Thousands. Legal systems, spiritual philosophies, medical practices, agricultural methods so advanced they became the foundation upon which other civilizations built their greatness. All of it was alive and flourishing here long before the word Africa was ever spoken. On one side, Africa, a name rooted in a Greek word describing this land as a place without cold, centering the experience of outsiders, defining this land by what Europeans did not have to suffer here. On the other side, Alkebulan, a name that describes this land as the mother of all humanity, the garden, the beginning, the source of everything that came after. One name is about abstinence, the other name is about everything. One looks at this land from the outside and describes what is missing from the European experience. The other looks from within and describes what this land gave to the entire world. This is not a linguistics debate. This is the difference between a stolen identity and a true one. Between a label placed on you by someone who conquered you, and a name given by the ancestors who built you. And this is what was deliberately buried. Not by accident. By a system. A long, sustained, brutal system designed to sever the people of this land from their own story. Schools were built here that punished children for speaking their own languages. Missionaries came and declared spiritual practices older than Christianity, older than Islam, older than any organized religion in the Western world, to be evil. Libraries were burned, oral traditions were mocked. Elders who carried the memory were pushed aside and disrespected. And with every generation, children were born who had never heard the word Alkebulan, who had never been told their homeland had a name before the colonizers came, who grew up believing the story started when outsiders arrived, as though everything before that was darkness and waiting. That is the real horror. Not the Greek fright, not cold weather. The real horror is what was done to a people's memory. But the name survived, because truth is stubborn, because in every generation, there are people who refuse to let go. Historians, elders, scholars, ordinary people who felt something wrong in the version of history they were handed, and kept digging until they found what was real. Alkebulan survived in manuscripts, in the writings of Muslim scholars who documented the ancient traditions of this continent, in the work of historians like Yosef Ben Jochannan, who dedicated his entire life to recovering what was taken, who sat in libraries and archives and dug through centuries of buried truth to return it to the people it belonged to. The name survived because the people survived. And as long as they are here, the truth is here. So now you are here. And you know something that most people who use the word Africa every single day do not know. You know that the Greeks described this land as without cold, without horror, and that even in that diminished description, they could not conceal what this land actually was. A place of life, not death, of warmth, not suffering, of greatness, not absence. You know that the Numidians made Rome bleed, that Carthage forced 3 wars before it fell, that Nubia ruled Egypt, that Homer said the gods descended to feast with the people of this land. And you know that none of them, not the Numidians, not the Carthaginians, not the Nubians, not the Moors, none of them called their home Africa. They called it Al, Mother of Mankind, Garden of Eden, the origin, the beginning, the source of everything that came after. This land did not need outsiders to give it meaning. It already had meaning, ancient, deep, unshakable meaning, long before any foreign tongue tried to rename its identity. The cold and horror that the Greeks feared in their own winters. This land never had it, not because it was lucky, because this land was built differently, because the people who came from here were built differently, because something about this soil, this sky, this ancient ground, produces a kind of human being that the rest of the world has spent centuries trying to copy, contain, or destroy because it could not be ignored. The mother of mankind does not apologize for what she produced, and neither should her children. If something shifted in your chest while you were watching this, don't let it stop here. Subscribe, because what you just heard is one thread in a much larger story. A story of kingdoms and queens, ancient science and buried philosophies, stolen names and surviving truths, and we are going to pull every single thread. Share this with someone who still thinks the name Africa is just a name because it was never just a name. A name is an identity, a name is a history, a name is the difference between knowing who you are and living inside someone else's description of you. The Greeks said this land was without horror. The ancestors said this land was the mother of mankind. Now you know which one told the truth. Alkebulan, the real name, the true name, the original name. Remember it. In the ancient north, along the edge where this land meets the Mediterranean, lived a people called the Numidians. If you don't know the Numidians, stop and learn, because these people were extraordinary in ways history has deliberately understated. The Numidians were horsemen, unlike anything the ancient world had ever seen. They rode without saddles, without bridles, guiding their horses with nothing but their knees and their will. Fast, unpredictable, and devastating in battle. When Hannibal crossed the Alps and brought Rome to its knees, it was Numidian cavalry at his side delivering some of the most critical damage. And when their king Jugurtha launched a guerrilla campaign against Rome, he humiliated Roman general after Roman general for years. The Roman Senate reportedly admitted this war was draining them in ways no other enemy had managed. A man from this land made the most powerful empire on earth look foolish. The Numidians did not call themselves Africans. They were of this land with their own name, their own identity, their own pride. Then there was Carthage. If the Numidians made Rome nervous, Carthage made Rome existential. Carthage was not just a city, it was a maritime empire, built by people who mastered the sea and controlled trade routes across the entire western Mediterranean. Its wealth, military strength, and reach extended into Spain, Sardinia, and deep into this continent. Rome fought Carthage 3 times. 3 massive, prolonged, bloody wars. And even after finally winning, Rome was not satisfied with victory. They burned Carthage, tore down every wall, every building, every structure. The historical debate over whether they salted the earth afterward almost misses the point. The intent was clear. Rome did not want to defeat Carthage. Rome wanted to erase it, wanted to ensure nothing, not a stone, not a memory, not a single idea would ever rise from that ground again. That is how much Carthage threatened them. When your enemy has to destroy every trace of you just to feel safe, that is not weakness. That is a testament to how powerful you were. Further south lay Nubia, also called Kush, a civilization older and deeper than Egypt itself. Nubia had pyramids. More pyramids than Egypt. Sharper pyramids, built with a precision that still puzzles engineers today. Nubia produced gold in enormous quantities that flowed north into Egypt and beyond. But Nubia was not Egypt's servant. Nubia was Egypt's equal. And at certain points in history, Nubia was Egypt's ruler. The 25th dynasty, the pharaohs, who sat on the most famous throne in the ancient world, were Nubian. Dark-skinned kings from the south who came north and governed one of the greatest civilizations in human history. Nubia was the spine of the ancient world, the backbone holding everything upright. And yet, in most textbooks handed to students around the world, Nubia gets a paragraph, maybe two, and the ancient world spoke of the Ethiopians, not as a single modern nation, but as the name the Greeks used broadly for the people of this continent. The Greek word meant burnt-faced people, and it was not used as an insult, it was used with reverence. Homer, the greatest poet of the ancient Greek world, wrote about the Ethiopians. He described them as so righteous, so noble, so beloved, that the gods of Olympus themselves would descend to feast among them. The gods left heaven to eat with the people of this land. That is what Homer wrote. That is what the ancient Greeks believed. And then came the Moors. Carrying the ancient flame forward, they crossed into Europe in the 700s and built a civilization in Spain that made everything around it look primitive. Libraries holding hundreds of thousands of books, hospitals, paved roads, street lighting in cities, while the rest of Europe was burning torches in darkness. The Moors brought algebra into Europe. Advanced medicine, astronomy, philosophy. Europe did not stumble into its Renaissance by accident. It entered the Renaissance after centuries of contact with the Moors, absorbing, studying, and learning from the people of this land. This is what was here. This is who was here. Now let's talk about the name. Africa, where did it come from, who gave it, and what does it actually mean? Because this is where the story stops being history and becomes something personal. Something that should make you angry, not the kind that destroys, but the kind that wakes you up. The Romans first used Africa to describe one single province, one controlled region in what is now northern Tunisia, one area, not the vast landmass stretching from the Mediterranean to the Cape, just a conquered piece of territory given a label for administrative convenience. Over time, as European powers extended their reach and their maps across more of this land, they stretched that provincial label over the entire continent. One colonial name dragged across millions of miles of ancient civilization until it covered everything. And the people living here, generation after generation, through slavery, through colonization, through forced schooling and cultural destruction, were taught to use that name, taught to call their home by the name their conquerors gave it. But where did Rome get the word? The ancient Greek term Afrik is one of the most cited etymological roots of Africa. And when you look at what it actually means, something deeply uncomfortable rises to the surface. Break it down. The ancient Greek prefix a means without, an absence, a negation, a removal of something. The root word phryke, it means cold, but it also means horror. In ancient Greek, cold and horror lived inside the same word. So Afrik, the likely origin of Africa, means without cold, but it also means without horror. A land free of cold, a land free of horror. A place where the brutal winters of Europe did not reach. Where the thing that made European life so hard, the biting frost, the death that came with winter, simply did not exist. Now pause. Think carefully about what that reveals. The people naming this land were naming it from their own fear. They looked at this continent and described it by what it lacked from their perspective. They named it by the cold they dreaded, by the horror of their own winters, by their absence, not this land's presence. They did not name it for what this land was. They named it for what it was not compared to themselves. This is one of the oldest tools of colonization, and it was embedded in the very name before colonization even became a formal system. You erase a place's identity by describing it only in relation to yourself. You make your experience the standard, and everything else becomes either a variation of you or an absence of you. Without cold, without horror. As if the greatest land on earth needed to be defined by the absence of a European problem. As if the mother of mankind could be reduced to the place where our winters don't happen. And yet, and this is what will break you open if you sit with it long enough, even in that diminished outsider description, the truth leaked through, without horror, because this land was not horror. This land was life. This land was the beginning of life. While Europe shivered through its dark ages, while people died of plague and famine and the unrelenting cruelty of winter, this land was warm, this land was growing, this land was building. Even the Greeks, even the Romans, even the people who eventually came to exploit this continent, even they, in the act of naming it, admitted something. There was no horror here. That this place existed outside the darkness that defined their world. They just couldn't bring themselves to say what it actually was, so they said what it was not. And that half-truth became the name the entire world still uses today. But the people of this land did not need the Greeks to tell them they had no horror. They already knew what they had. They already had a name for it, a name that described them in their own voice, from their own understanding, not in relation to anyone else. That name is Alkebulan, say Ledidlan, Alkebulan, recorded by ancient scholars, documented in the writings of the Moors, alive in historical texts that predate the Roman Empire. This name was breathing long before Rome built its first road, long before Greece held its first Olympic Games, long before any outside power had the audacity to plant a flag in soil that was never theirs. Alkebulan. Its meaning is not a comment on whether, it is not an outsider noting what is absent. It means mother of mankind. Some translations say Garden of Eden. Both point to the same truth. This land knew it was the origin. It knew it was the source. The first humans walked here. The first families grew here. The first societies. The first attempts to make meaning out of existence. All of it began here. So the people of this land called it what it was. Not without horror. Not a Roman province. The mother of mankind. The weight of that should hit you.